Welcome to Simple Endurance Coaching's Everyday Cyclists and Runners Guide to Performance video podcast. I'm Paul Werlowski, head coach and owner of Simple Endurance Coaching, and each week we talk about one thing that seems to be working for everyday cyclists and runners for their performance, health, and fitness. Subscribe below to the podcast and sign up on my website, simpleendurancecoaching.com, for a free core strength and stability video. Here is this week's podcast. Hi, I'm Paul Werlowski, head coach and owner of Simple Endurance Coaching. In today's edition of the Everyday Cyclist and Runner's Guide to Performance video podcast from Simple Endurance Coaching, we'll talk about the importance of endurance training. If there's one thing I repeat more than anything to my athletes and endurance sports friends, it's this: slow down. Here's what I mean. The majority of your training should be at a slow endurance pace where you're able to have a conversation with a friend and be able to breathe through your nose. These are not recovery rides to the coffee shop, but intentional rides where you're riding at a moderate intensity for a long period of time. This also goes for runners and other endurance athletes, because if you do this zone 2 endurance training, you get a lot of adaptation without all the fatigue that comes from training harder. Plus, you get a critical adaptation, learning to burn fat as a fuel only when you ride slow. In fact, when you start to increase your intensity just a little bit, your body starts burning more carbohydrates. You get the most adaptation from zone 2 training. And here's the thinking behind that. Really hard training sessions get the most bang for your buck in terms of adaptations and benefits. Go fast, get lots of adaptations. But to be able to do these at the intensity you need to be rested. If you do them when you're not rested, you simply can't get the full benefit of the work. We're sort of wasting your time. However, these high-intensity sessions build a lot of fatigue, so you can't do more than 2, maybe 3 if you're a kid per week. Otherwise, we're not going to be rested enough to go hard enough. But what do you do with the rest of the week? You still need to train. So doing zone 2 endurance training allows us to get the adaptations and benefits from training without building all the fatigue. Make sense? Here's some of the research behind Zone 2 and how it works, and then we're going to talk about how to do some of this endurance training. Essentially, here are the key adaptations. Number 1, better fat utilization. Your body uses fat and carbohydrates as fuel. But if you can train your body to use the virtually unlimited fat stores as fuel, you're going to be far more efficient. Number 2, increased mitochondria development. The more mitochondria you have in your cells, the powerhouse, the more efficient you'll become. Number 3, increased capillarization. You create more and larger webs of capillaries in the muscles, which allow for more blood flow through the muscles. Number 4, an increased VO2 max and threshold. Yes, you're going to be able to ride harder for longer periods of time. And number 5, improved lactate buffering. When you exercise, you produce lactate, which serves as a fuel. The more you're able to turn that lactate into fuel, the more efficient you become, but sometimes it's too much. So here are 3 research studies that help us understand why this type of training is so important and why it works. A 2000 study called The Effect of Aerobic Base Training on Endurance Performance in Cyclists found that cyclists who incorporated Zone 2 endurance training into their training regimen showed significant improvements in endurance performance, including increased speed and power output. The adaptations observed in these cyclists who did the Zone 2 endurance training were primarily related to an improvement in your endurance performance. Number 1, increased VO2 max. VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen that any of us can utilize during intense exercise. The study found that the cyclists who incorporated aerobic-based training, our endurance, saw significant increases in their VO2 max. This suggests that their cardiovascular systems became more efficient at delivering oxygen to the working muscles, enabling them to sustain higher levels of effort for longer durations of time. Number 2, an enhanced lactate threshold. The threshold refers, remember we talked about that earlier, it refers to that exercise at which the lactate begins to accumulate in the bloodstream. We use it as fuel, but the cyclists in the studies showed improvement in their threshold, which means they were able to sustain higher intensities before experiencing a significant increase in those blood lactate levels where we can no longer use it as fuel. This adaptation is indicative of improved aerobic capacity and better utilization of lactate as a fuel source. Number 3, improved economy of movement. Economy of movement refers to the energy efficiency of an athlete's movement. You can pedal faster and more efficiently. So the study found that the cyclists who underwent aerobic-based training demonstrated an improvement in their cycling economy. This means they became more efficient at converting energy into forward motion, requiring less energy to maintain a given speed or power output. So improved economy translates to greater speed and endurance during cycling activities. Number 4, increased power output. The cyclists who incorporated the Zone 2 endurance training also experienced increases in their power output. So power output is a measure of the work performed per unit of time, and obviously is a crucial factor in cycling performance. The observed increase in power output indicates that the cyclist became stronger and more capable of generating greater force on the pedals, resulting obviously in improved speed and performance. So a study from the famous Dr. Steven Seiler shows essential adaptations through aerobic training, as long as it's regular. Seiler conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis on a bunch of studies for aerobic-based training for endurance athletes and found several physiological and cellular adaptations as a result of incorporating the Zone 2 endurance training. So here are some of those adaptations, some of which we mentioned earlier, but now more detailed. Number 1, increased mitochondrial density and function. As you know, mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles within cells responsible for aerobic energy production. The research indicated that aerobic-based training led to an increase in mitochondrial density, how many there were and what size they were, and improved mitochondrial function. This allows for more efficient energy production through aerobic metabolism, enhancing endurance capacity. Number 2, improved fat burning. So, Zone 2 in training promotes the utilization of fat as a fuel source during exercise. The meta-analysis found that this type of training induces adaptations that enhance the body's ability to mobilize and utilize fatty acids for energy. By optimizing fat metabolism, athletes can preserve their glycogen stores for fast efforts, which are crucial for sustaining high-intensity efforts. Number 3, enhanced capillarization. Capillaries are those little tiny blood vessels that supply oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. The findings indicated that Zone 2 endurance training promoted an increase in capillary density within those trained muscles, which means more of these blood vessels improve blood flow and therefore oxygen delivery into the working muscles, facilitating better endurance performance. Number 4, improved lactate clearance. As we've mentioned, this lactate is produced during exercise, and at a certain point, Zone 2 endurance training enhances the body's ability to clear that lactate and use it more efficiently. This adaptation helps delay the onset of fatigue by preventing the buildup of lactate and promoting its utilization as a fuel. Number 5, altered gene expression. I don't get all of this part, but at a cellular level, aerobic-based training was found to induce changes in how genes were expressed related to aerobic metabolism and endurance performance. So this includes the upregulation of the genes that are involved in mitochondrial biogenesis, how many we produce, fatty acid utilization, and oxidative phosphorylation. All this stuff simply means that there are cellular processes that improve endurance capacity. So the third study on Zone 2 endurance training shows an improved economy. The study, the effect of low-intensity training on speed and power in competitive cyclists, focuses on the impact of this Zone 2 endurance training on various performance parameters in competitive cyclists, particularly in cycling economy, speed, and power output. The cycling economy, different than efficiency, refers to the energy cost of maintaining a given cycling speed, and it is influenced by oxygen consumption, oxygen delivery, muscle fiber type distribution, and how this all gets coordinated. We can often see economy in the efficiency factor, EF, and heart rate to power ratios on training peaks, so two of the numbers that I use for my athletes. The study found that the Zone 2 training improved cycling economy by promoting several of the physiological adaptations that we've already talked about, including mitochondrial density, increased capillarization, more capillaries to carry more blood, and the development of more slow twitch muscle fibers, the ones that produce aerobic power. Additionally, the study found that low-intensity training positively impacted the speed and power output in competitive athletes. While low-intensity training targets aerobic capacity, it also indirectly enhances anaerobic, which is not really an appropriate word, but big-time performance through its positive effects on overall fitness. So by improving your VO2 max, improving your lactate threshold, improving your muscle glycogen storage capacity, this low-intensity training allows cyclists to produce more power overall and maintain a higher speed for longer durations. That means an improvement in over threshold speed capacity that it contributes to enhanced performance during short bursts of intense effort, such as sprinting or climbing steep inclines. So this third study demonstrates that low-intensity training indirectly and directly enhances speed and power output by improving aerobic and anaerobic capacity, VO2 max, lactate threshold, and muscle glycogen storage capacity. So this all means that Zone 2 endurance training is effective for cyclists because it targets primarily that aerobic energy system, helping to develop a strong aerobic base. So this type of training improves the body's ability to efficiently utilize oxygen, convert fat sources into energy, and that leads to enhanced endurance capacity. This all makes sense? I hope so. Zone 2 training also promotes muscular endurance and helps clear the metabolic crap that all this training produces, delaying fatigue for longer and more intense efforts. Additionally, doing a lot of this endurance training work helps cyclists perform hard intervals at different times by providing a solid foundation of that aerobic fitness that we've been talking about. The aerobic base is developed through this Zone 2 training. The bigger the base, it allows you to recover more quickly between intense efforts, maintain a higher power output for longer durations, and improves cyclists' ability to tolerate and clear lactate through these high intensity intervals. Zone 2, and maybe I should refer to this early, refers to a 5-zone model of training intensities, with Zone 1 being recovery, Zone 3 tempo, Zone 4 threshold, and Zone 5 is VO2 max and above. So Zone 2 refers to these intensities at or below your first threshold. The first threshold is where your blood lactate starts to increase and your breathing gets a little harder. Generally, I tell clients to do their Zone 2 rides using the talk test or ride with their mouth closed, kind of the opposite, although you could do both within a ride. The talk test is when you're able to have a decent conversation with a friend or maybe yourself, but not about politics or religion, because that's going to get you going too hard. Your breathing is slightly labored, but you're still able to talk. The other method is to work on nose breathing, where you keep your mouth closed and work on breathing just through your nose into your belly. Besides being a good way to monitor the intensity, nose breathing gives you some other benefits because it's a great way to make sure that you're getting all the oxygen possible into your bloodstream. Generally, though, monitoring your heart rate is probably the most effective way to make sure that you're still doing Zone 2 endurance training. For most of us, those of us who are masters athletes, staying under 130 to 135 beats per minute keeps us in the right zone. Some of the kids I coach, they have aerobic thresholds of 145 or 150. That's when the talk test comes in to confirm that. So the key to using that heart rate is to know that your heart rate is going to increase the longer you ride, simply because you're getting tired and you have to recruit more muscle fibers to keep pushing you along. So if you want to ride at a consistent 200 watts for 4 hours, your heart rate's going to increase and take you out of the fat burning zone. So that's why it's better to use simply heart rate as a guide. So you just, I'm going to stay at 130 for the whole ride, even if your speed decreases. Thank you for watching this edition of the Simple Endurance Coaching video podcast, the Everyday Cyclist and Runner's Guide to Performance. Each week, thereabouts, we dive into what's working in endurance sports training for everyday cyclists and runners, particularly masters, gravel, and cyclocross racers. Find the full article below on my blog, linked in the notes, and get a free core strength and stability training video when you opt in to receive my weekly blog posts about what works in endurance sports. Sign up below as well for a virtual coffee so we can discuss your goals, we can talk about your questions, and talk about making your endurance training more effective, fun, and simple with a capital S. Thanks, and I'll see you out in the road.